All right, everybody, welcome to our semi-live chat on water safety here for Drowning Prevention Week with Water Babies. Today, we have an amazing chat and we have an amazing guest with us. We're going to be talking a little bit about water safety and specifically about prevention, supervision, and actions that we can take. And we're also going to look at a couple of myths and misconceptions around water safety as well. So I wanted to first start off by introducing Pamela Fuselli, who's our guest for today. Pamela, would you like to tell us a little about yourself?
Sure. Hi, Shawn. Thanks for having me. So I'm the CEO at Parachute, and Parachute is a national injury prevention charity. So we focus on things like drowning prevention, but also things like fall prevention, poison prevention, motor vehicle crash prevention, those types of things. And we work across the country. We do a lot of education and advocacy for change.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your expertise and your presence here. I'm just for everybody. I'm Shawn. I am the president of Water Babies Canada, and I love teaching babies to swim. And obviously, the core of what we do is about keeping everybody safe in the water. So I couldn't be more excited to be having this chat. Let's start with water safety. Does that work for you, Pam?
Yeah, Shawn, the summer's off to a hot start. It's in full swing. People want to get into the water. I was at a cottage last weekend and it was lovely to be able to get in the water. So, but we have to be careful around water. So, you want to tell us a little bit about why it's important to be water safety and especially when we're talking about young kids under 5.
Yeah, I mean, of course, and that's the world that we live in water babies is children under 5. And there's some unfortunately really scary and sad statistics that kind of back up the reason why this is so important. Drowning is the second leading cause of injury-related deaths for children in Canada. And children between the ages of 1 to 4 are at the highest risk of drowning. 92% of drownings are occurring in children under 5. And it's because of lack of supervision. That's what it comes down to. 40% of drownings are in backyard pools with children that are between the ages of 1 and 4. Um, and like without the stats, drowning isn't what you see on TV. It's not loud. It's not violent. It's actually silent and fast. It can happen in an instant. So, and there are all these other options where we think, okay, well, yeah, you need a deep end of a pool or even a shallow end of a pool. It can happen in as little as 1 to 2 inches of water, especially because we're dealing with really, really little ones. So it's one of those things for us where the numbers back it up, but also it's a fact of life. And that's why it's so important to make sure that we're preventing drowning as much as possible.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, it's something that a lot of parents worry about, and I know we have some great information to share with them today.
Well, absolutely. So why don't we switch over and we'll talk a little bit about prevention to start. Actually, I wanted to ask you some questions about it. So, the idea of prevention is trying to make sure that, bad stuff doesn't happen. So, like, what does that look like for swimming from your side?
Yeah, and I think that that's a really good question about prevention. And I think a lot of folks think they're accidents, and we don't refer to them as accidents because we look at incidences of serious injuries or even fatal injuries, when we look at what contributed to that incident happening, we can see where prevention strategies could have been in place, whether that's individual behavior, but also from a sort of systems level, if you think so, sort of from an infrastructure or like environmental level. And so, prevention really is stopping the injury from happening in the first place. We can't turn back time as much as we would like to and have a redo. Often these injuries result in lifelong impacts, whether that's physical or mental health. We also want to focus, though, that we don't want to prevent the bumps and bruises of regular life. We have a podcast called Popping the Bubble Wrap because we often get accused of wanting to wrap kids in bubbles. And we're not. We want to focus on the serious injuries, on the life altering or life ending injuries. And as you said, there are some of those that are associated with in and around water. And so stopping a drowning from happening in the first place is what we want to focus on.
Well, I totally agree with that. So then from that perspective, what are some of the things that like you would want a parent or just any adult in charge of children to kind of look at?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is to understand what the hazards are. There's risks in everyday life, walking down the street, driving in a car. And at different age ranges, there's different risks. So at a young age, like 2, 3, 4, it may be a hazard. And in the older age ranges and in adults, being around a body of water may just be a risk that you have to manage. And so looking at what are some of the hazards that might be around a space where there is water, whether that's a pool or an open body of water, like a lake, a pond, and a stream. So look at things like, what could cause a slip or trip? Are there toys or even furniture around the deck of a pool that can pose a tripping hazard that would, have somebody go into the water unexpectedly. Even in around lakes and streams, rocks, fallen branches, those types of things that you can trip over. Something that parents probably think about is around the depth of the water. So how deep is the water? Um, does the slope as you go into the water, is it gradual or does it drop off? And that sort of speaks to the knowing the water that you're going into is very important. Checking for things like warning signs or instructions on beaches or around pools that authorities have put up to warn you about potential dangers. In open bodies of water, thinking about the currents and things that you may not be able to see from the surface, and those can impact drowning risk. Obviously, weather, if there's rain or thunderstorms or dangerous conditions, that certainly contributes. And then think about the water temperature. I know it's, in the middle of July, end of July, August, it can be very hot out when you're not in the water, but think about cold water, especially in the colder months. That can be quite dangerous as well. It affects muscle coordination and heart and breathing rates and those types of things. So when you're thinking about, what are the risks? I mean, one of the other major risks is access, just alone having access to the water.
And actually, that kind of transitions great into one of the next things I want to talk to you about, which is, a little bit about that bit of protection. So the things you've been talking about are kind of some of those like environmental factors, but many of them, other than maybe the toys and stuff, were things that are kind of already there. So what kind of things can you do to improve your environment that might help prevent stuff?
Yeah, we often talk about layers of protection in prevention and in drowning in particular. So there's always, especially with young kids and particularly with accessing water when they're not meant to be swimming, when you may not have eyes on them all the time, is what's going to buy you some time to realize the child isn't where they were supposed to be, or that they may have wandered off and, parents have a lot on their plates. And so active supervision is key, absolutely. But then these other layers of protection kind of kick in if you take your eyes off for 1 second, and they can be very fast. So when we talk about that, we look at, especially in backyard pools, having a four-sided pool fence. So making sure that the house is also protected from the pool in the backyard. Oftentimes we see three-sided, so you're protecting other people who don't live or visit your house from getting access to the backyard pool. But really, you also have to protect the people in the house. And so 1.2 meter high fence with a self-closing, self-latching gate is one of those layers of protection. So it will buy you some time if your child does get out of the house and is looking to access the pool, which is often a scenario, unfortunately, that we see with kids under 5, is that they're not meant to be swimming when something bad happens. It's that they get access to the body of water when they weren't meant to be swimming. So there's also things like, removing ladders from above ground pools that have steps that would, facilitate the child getting into the water. So remove those when those pools aren't in use, emptying those kiddie pools. Some of them can be quite deep. And as you said, children can drown in as little as 1 or 2 inches of water. The bathtub is also an area where we're concerned about drowning, so making sure the bathtub is empty. And being, again, that supervision piece is really key.
Yeah, I mean, actually, the above ground pool thing and removing those ladders, it's not even something that I, immediately thought of. I think that's an amazing idea, because it's not something that I really would have come across. Um, so totally get all that, and it's amazing advice for our parents. I was actually just wondering about, teaching water safety to our little ones.
Mhm.
You know, how are you supposed to do that, especially if they're really young?
Well, the first thing is to be a role model yourself. I know parents don't think that kids listen to them, especially when they get to the older ages, but in fact, we know that they do. So, for you to know how to swim is very important as a parent, not only to demonstrate to your child, but also to be able to react. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit later, but also demonstrating what you want your child to know and what your child to do, because they're watching you. As you probably know, that they imitate you, they imitate things that you say in a lot of times uncomfortable situations. So they are watching you. So really being, practice what you preach, really. But there's also things like teaching them about, not swimming alone, not jumping in head first. Some of that may apply to older kids, but running around, the pool, playing rough in the pool, those types of things are ways that you can teach your kids to respect but enjoy the water. And I think that's the balance that we want to strike. We don't want them to be fearful necessarily, but we do want them to respect the water and know when they can and can't go in. So making sure that they know that they shouldn't be in the water or near the water without a parent nearby. Those types of things are really important. Obviously, swimming lessons are, I think we're talking about other things around teaching kids water safety in and
I'll
around
definitely touch
water, right?
on swimming lessons in a minute, but I actually really
Yeah.
like some of the things that you said there about water safety specifically. Some of the things that jump out to me is that a lot of what we're really trying to teach, like, isn't particularly technical. So there are things that, a young mind really can take on. We wouldn't teach a child to go down the stairs head first. I think we could do that with a pool too. So I think that actually, that's super practical advice, and you don't have to be an expert to do that. And I think that's kind of the beauty of it. So honestly, love that. Um, if we're going to
Yeah,
get a little more technical, oh, sorry, did you want to say something?
sure.
Please go ahead.
I just jump in because I think you've made a really good point. And parents know their child the best, and knowing how they talk to them, on a regular day-to-day basis is important. And knowing that you don't need to be an expert in water safety to be able to talk to your kids about safety. So, make references to things that they have learned previously, maybe in on one of the cartoons that they watch or books that they've read or things like that, and make it relevant for them. And really, I think what you're saying is empower parents to, be able to take on this job and be confident in it.
Totally agree with that. And we're going to switch from that to kind of a different topic, which you might need a little bit more technical knowledge for, which is actually, preventing. You could learn to swim, and that would definitely help. So, I wanted to kind of ask you a little about your opinion on that, and we will kind of link it to what we're talking about later. But just for now, like, how would that really help?
Well, I mean, knowing how to swim is one of the essential skills. I mean, in Canada, we have lots of water available to us, whether that's, the lakes, but there's ponds and streams and pools, whether those are public pools or pools in your backyard or your friend's backyard. So, I think when we talk about water safety, a lot of times it is focused on kids, and that's absolutely important that they have water skills and learn to swim, but it's also very important that parents and caregivers know how to swim, so that they can react and they can get in the water and assist. So I think that that's, one essential part of drowning prevention, um, and can't be underestimated, but it's not enough. And I talked about those layers of protection before, but even strong swimmers in certain conditions, can get into trouble and have and can drown. So, when you're assessing those risks and hazards before about the current and know the body of water you're going into, and your own your own abilities and limitations and things like that. So, and always swim with a buddy. I mean, that whether you're, one or 81, that's a good rule to live by. So, swimming is really essential, and having good swim skills, starting early, making your kids comfortable with the water, again, is really important. And then pairing those with the other things like wearing a life jacket or a PFD when you're in and around water, when especially younger kids. There are some regulations around wearing of life jackets and PFDs on boats, but unfortunately they don't go far enough. The regulation is about having them on board for every person, not actually having them on. And I liken it to not wearing your seatbelt and thinking that you'll be able to put your seatbelt on in the instance of a crash. You don't have time. Put it on, wear it
So
all the
I'll be
time.
totally honest with you, and I feel like this is going to come off as not true, but like I assumed you had to wear them. I actually didn't know that if you just have it sitting in the corner that you've actually discharged your legal duty. So that is a little bit scary, because if the boat capsizes, you're not going to have time to go and get your life jacket. So totally,
You do not you do not have time. And then you see the scenarios where, and sorry, by the way, we are looking at and working towards changing that policy to be able to, making it mandatory for at least certain young people to wear their life jackets, although it doesn't really matter what the age is, you all should be. But I often see this with bike helmets too, is the child is wearing the PFD or the life jacket, but the parent isn't. And when you get into trouble and you have a issue, God forbid you actually drown, what happens to your child? The protection doesn't end at a certain age. It's for everybody.
yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And I think that I wanted to go back to something you said about learning to swim. At Water Babies, we do get calls from parents who are like, I really want to waterproof my child so that I don't have to worry. And it's not that we're saying that people should be chronically worrying about their children, but when it comes to water, that's one of the messages that I think we always want to give, that it doesn't matter what happens. There are things that we're not going to anticipate, and anything can happen at any moment, which is why it's so important to be prepared. And we know that there isn't any piece of equipment or training that can completely make people safe. So I think that that's probably time for us to move on to talking a little about what other people in the area can do in terms of supervision to help children. So, um, can you tell us a little bit about like why you would even need supervision if we've just done all that, we have all the equipment, we've taught them to swim, we've taught them water safety, and we've looked at the environment. So why is supervision so important?
Well, I think the quick reaction is the key. And again, that preventing something from happening, whether that's completely or as something begins to happen, if you are within arm's reach, you can take action to prevent the drowning from happening. And that's whether you're in at a lake or in the bathroom, next to your child in a bathtub. As we've talked about, 1 inch of water can be a drowning scenario for children, especially under 5. And so, the parents know this best. Kids are mobile and curious, and one day they can't do it, and the next day they can. So they do require close and constant supervision. So active supervision. But again, you also have to take a look at what stage of development is your child at? How are they, cognitively? What's their physical abilities? And so, but having eyes on your kids, and again, I say parents, you can't do that 24/7, and that's where those layers of protection come in. But when you're in and around water, make sure, especially in groups, often we hear when something happens, I thought somebody else was looking after the kids that were watching the kids. So have like a designated driver, have a designated adult watching the kids, and pass that off to another adult so that everybody knows who's doing it at this particular moment. You know, Watching kids around water, as you said, is silent and it happens quickly. So you're not necessarily going to hear them. So don't be distracted if you are that designated adult or the only adult. Don't be on your phone reading a book, those types of things. Have them again within arm's reach and sight. Um, the I think some of the other things, and I touched on the life jackets and PFDs, and parents wanting to have something that they can, relax a little bit more. And yes, when you have a life jacket and a PFD on, that does absolutely help. Again, that's another layer of protection. But there are products out on the market. We used to call them water wings. They call them floaties now. Those are not flotation devices. Those are not life-saving devices. Those are more categorized as a toy. And so, supervision using those types of products we don't recommend that.
I totally agree. Actually, just as a kind of an aside, in Water Babies lessons, we specifically don't use any kind of attached flotation devices specifically for those reasons, because it does give that kind of false sense of security. And so, we're totally on that same wavelength when it comes to that. So what we've
Yeah,
talked about
and in
now,
in
oh,
bath
sorry.
Oh, sorry. Just to touch on the bathtub piece, which, maybe doesn't get as much attention around water safety, is the other thing that aren't safety devices are bath seats and bath rings. And again, when you said false sense of security, that kind of popped into my head is that, it gives them the sense that they can leave just for a minute. And that is very dangerous. So we have seen these bath seats, they have suction cups to the bottom, or they attach to the side of tubs, and they can tip over. Your baby can climb out. We've seen bath rings, tip over, and then the baby can't right themselves because they're now in this device, or they can slip through the leg holes and things like that. So anything like that, again, like you say, supervision is key, and active, within arm's reach is always what we recommend. And that there are devices that you might want to use, but don't let them give you a false sense of security.
Well, hopefully after, today, people won't have that false sense of security. But what I want to do is kind of close the loop. And we've talked about controlling our environment and then making sure that we're watching to make sure nothing goes wrong. But then what happens when something does go wrong? Like what if you're going to tell a parent, if there are, two or three main things that you can do to protect your child in the event something does happen, what advice would you give them?
Um, Always have a first aid kit handy. Have a phone handy to call for help. If you're around a pool, having a reaching pole and a ring buoy attached to a rope is really key. So just like knowing how to swim, learn first aid and CPR. They are very effective interventions if something happens. Make sure, like I said, have that flotation device, that ring or reaching pole, so that you can help the person, the child in distress. Um, you know, Make sure that, you have the first aid kits ready. And you know how to perform a rescue if you don't have any aids. And this is where being able to swim and being comfortable yourself in water, really makes a difference. And so those are some of the things that parents should really think about and have on hand when they're in and around water. And I shouldn't necessarily have to say this, but call 911. Tell them what's happened. Answer their questions, and make sure you stay on the line until help does arrive.
That's really, really good advice. I hope no one ever has to use it, if I'm being totally honest about that. But I think that that's something that doesn't always happen. So thank you for that. Um, so the last kind of thing that I wanted to have a little bit of chat with you is about some misconceptions, um, I'm going to say some myths around drowning. And there are a lot of these kind of concepts of things that can happen without any kind of major drowning incident, the way that you and I think about it. But what we would really like to do, and I know this is definitely something your organization feels strongly about as well, is to kind of dispel that myth and basically say that ultimately there's drowning and it can be fatal or non-fatal. And if you have one of those two events, there are things that can happen for it, but we should really characterize it that way and make sure that that's really what we're being clear about. So we have had questions from us about, well, what would happen if something bad were to happen in the lesson and then, or lesson, or just in real life, but we get the questions about lessons, of course.
Right.
And, the child takes on a lot of water and then there could be some danger to them after. And what we would kind of talk about that and say that's like a kind of near drowning incident. And I was wondering if you might be able to just tell us a little bit about what a near drowning incident, what effects it might have.
Yeah, and I think that's the, non-fatal, but there may be um, complications afterwards. And so, if they've had some liquid in their lungs, in their respiratory system, obviously close watch, taking them to the doctor or to the hospital to make sure that, nothing more serious has happened or more complications have happened. Um, but knowing that, from a medical perspective and from our perspective, you either have a fatal drowning and drown in the water, or you are brought out of the water, you haven't drowned, and that's non-fatal, you survived that. Obviously be watchful about symptoms, trouble breathing, those types of things. Always, cautious, an ounce of prevention, as it were. As I said, take them to see a doctor or take them to the hospital, get them checked out. Having medical care, I think, is one of the key things, because this is an area where you are not an expert and you shouldn't be an expert. You need to go and get expert help on those types of scenarios.
I really appreciate that. That's really, really clear information that can be actionable for our parents, and I really, really hope they take that to heart. What I am going to do just really quickly is kind of expose the myth that we were talking about. I'm going to use the bad word once, but only once, which is the words dry drowning. All right. We get questions about this all the time, and the real concept of dry drowning in lessons for us is everything that Pamela just talked about. That's really what we're talking about. When other people use those words, and if you look up it on the internet, all that concept is actually it's vocal cord spasms that have nothing to do with swimming, nothing to do with anything. It could happen, and hopefully it doesn't, could happen to me right now on this call, has nothing to do with anything else. So if you do ever hear that, please know that that has absolutely nothing to do with swimming, nothing to do with water. And what we really want to think of is the complications that come from non-fatal drownings, just the way that Pamela laid it out for us. So
Yeah, thanks, Shawn. That's very helpful. Very clear too.
you're most welcome on that. And I mean, the biggest thing that I want to do is just thank you for coming out and having this chat today. I'm hoping that that information is going to help other people feel more secure. It'll hopefully it doesn't have to save lives, but maybe it does. And it just allows everyone to kind of enjoy their life without having that massive amount of anxiety, but also understanding the responsibility. And as you said, I think almost right at the beginning, learning to actually respect the water, both for what it can bring to your life, but also for what it can take away.
Yeah, that's absolutely okay. Get out there, have fun. That's the joy of being able to enjoy the water, enjoy your family, whatever you do. There's some steps to take that will keep you safe. And the goal is to get you to be doing that next week, next next year, and the years to come.
Well, again, I can't thank you enough for your time. And to all of our Water Babies parents who are out there, hopefully you have a great day and a great weekend, and we'll see you all later.
Thanks. Thanks, Shawn.